Hello, once again, dear listeners, and welcome to the Jewish Homesteading Project audio show. This is going to be episode 9, titled Building a Jewish Homestead, Part 1. Today we're going to talk about some of the uniquely Jewish aspects of building a Jewish homestead, as well as some of the regular aspects that people struggle with nowadays when they're looking to get out of the city and to move out somewhere by themselves. Fortunately, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the tragic events of Israel that are all, of course, on our minds, and that our prayers are with the people there and with the soldiers in the fighting there around Gaza. Unfortunately, with this comes a strong uptick in anti-Semitism. Of course, it goes without saying that we all need to be aware of our surroundings at all times and aware of certain developments that could happen, keeping up with your local news where there might be any sort of protest or these sort of things. We're dealing with people, unfortunately, who do not care about using violence to get to their means. They would happily hurt you. These are the same attitudes, unfortunately, that we have with the terrorist, and they bleed over to the people that are the quote-unquote protesters here in America or in other areas. So please be aware of that and make sure that you take care of yourselves in that regard. So the first thing that we want to discuss here before we talk about the basics of a homestead and a homestead as a community and why, how you would do things is we need to talk about why one's necessary at all. Why would you move out? And well, there are many reasons to move out. And not every listener might necessarily be in a large city right now, but generally Jewish people tend to congregate in the larger cities. They don't tend to be the type of people that disperse themselves out all over the countryside so much, especially in the different Galus areas. They tend to be people who concentrate in large cities. And the cities are what I'm going to focus on today, is the area you're moving out of. And frankly, the cities are getting rough. I mean, anyone that lives in London nowadays can tell you that there's whole sections of the city that are absolutely not only an obstacle for police and law enforcement, but just specifically for Jews, that you can't even go in those areas without being harassed and harangued. I know years ago when I went to Paris, I'm just walking around through a lot of the touristy places. I definitely wasn't in the slums. I was in the fancier areas of Paris to see sights. For a layover I had there, I got a lot of stares from a lot of a certain type of people, and it's not the safest place for Jews. That definitely goes here in America with a lot of these cities where they're having mass protest. If you recall, just a couple years ago, they had people attacked in the streets in New York City. There have been numerous assaults. There have been an assault out in L.A. into someone's home. There was someone assaulted on the street in Maryland. So cities are getting rough. And the reason for that is cities are a center. They're a concentration of people, and therefore they concentrate other things with those people. They concentrate influence, culture, politics, religious ideas, and military. So whenever there's going to be some sort of new idea or new fad, it tends to catch on in the cities. It normally doesn't start in the middle of nowhere in the country in some town of 1,000 people. It's normally in a city, some new trend or something like that, whether it be cultural or otherwise. And all of these new ideas that are being pushed culturally are going to start up in cities. Right now, I would say most of those ideas are not good ideas. If you listen to any of the popular music that's out right now and compare it to music from 100 years ago, you can definitely say that the progressions we've made and the priorities that the culture and media put up are not the priorities of a religious Jewish person. Political things as well are the same. Obviously, the state capitals and country capitals are where you're going to have most of the political concentration. And therefore, the politicians always take a little bit better themselves. If you recall, when they had riots in the States 4 years ago, there was a lot of times when there would be a riot going on, except when it got to the mayor's block. And then suddenly all the police were found there. So you would be in a city, in an area where you might be affected by one of these events, unfortunately. And, the mayor's over there taking care of himself and all of his friends. So all this political concentration will be there too. And also any new political agendas or any new political ideas, new political policies, all of this is going to focus first on cities. Cities will be the center of legal enforcement. And in the small town, rednecks do what rednecks do. Same thing with religious. The same way that Jewish people are concentrated religiously into cities. Most religious Jews are in certain cities. That would be the same way that you're going to have anti-religious ideas, or counter-Jewish religious ideas. Those are also going to be concentrated as they start up in cities quite often. And of course, military, if the military gets called in anywhere, if they bring in the National Guard to put down rioters, they're not coming to a podunk town in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota. They're going to go to capitals. They're going to go to big commercial cities, places like that. So all of that would come in the city. If you want to avoid things like that, then you're looking to get out of the cities. And of course, that comes with another bad side, is that you're getting away from a large concentration of Jews to going to a much smaller concentration. And that's difficult, and there are challenges that come with that, and we're going to address those later on in this show. When it comes to small towns, some people are like, okay, well, if the cities are so bad, and, they are bad, the crime's increasing, there are other issues in the cities, okay, why not a small town? Why couldn't we move to a small town? We'll pick somewhere like Lakewood. They got away with it in Lakewood, and they all moved down to a smaller town. It wasn't a huge metropolis when people started moving into it. We'll just move into somewhere like Lakewood. And yeah, it could be that you can move to somewhere like Lakewood, and it might be all right. But I'll be very frank, small towns are also becoming a lot more like isolated suburbs. They sort of, in some cases, can have the worst of both worlds. All the increase in criminality and problems that you have in the cities can also be seen in the small towns, and it can be coupled without the benefits of the city. So you'll have, say, a problem that you might have in the city, like overbearing legal enforcement. There'll be a lot of noise laws that keep you from having chickens. There'll be lawn covenants that make sure that you can't plant a garden. And then also you'll have economic stagnation. You'll have a lack of opportunity. Job availability will be much more scarce in the small towns than it is in cities. So you're going to give up a lot of what you had, and you may not necessarily get much back for it. Now, obviously, each town has to be assessed on its own particular merits, but in general, I think that's not the best choice. If you're going to move to say, I'll move to a town of 50,000 or something, the majority of those people aren't going to be Jewish. You're going to be leaving all of your moistus and everything behind just to cough it up for, a small, economically depressed town. There could be exceptions, but in general, I think that small towns are not the answer. Okay, so when we go into looking for a homestead, looking for somewhere that people would move out of the city towards, what are we looking at? In general, we're looking for an area that's going to give us more choices and more abilities, and is not going to have a lot of these evils of the cities. Somewhere that doesn't have as many overbearing rules that prevent us from doing certain things we want. A place that will have natural resources, a place that's clean and not prone to too many natural disasters. A lot of people are going to want the ability to raise animals and whatever crops you like. Some people might value the ability to take care of your own medical care or your own children's schooling, where laws don't dictate exactly what you must do in that regard. So that's sort of the areas we're looking for, and those are going to be different whether you're talking about Israel, the United States, Canada, Australia, or anywhere else. You're also looking for somewhere you can buy or rent or have some sizable piece of land. And sizable means a different amount to everyone depending on their needs and their ability. Obviously you don't need 1,000 acres if you can't do anything with it. And, you only need 10 acres if that's all you can manage, or only 2. But size of land and being able to afford and maintain that piece of land and legally own it will be very important as well. Peace and quiet is one thing. A lot of people are going to want to get away from different cultural influences. And I have actually talked to some people and asked about the people who come up from New York City to the country here where I live. And I said to them, why do people come up so much? I know back in the day it was because of air conditioning, but right now, why is it still such a huge thing? Is it just for fun? Is it for the camps? Is it for And one of the answers I got is that it's actually a tznius thing. That in the summer there's so many people dressing all sorts of ways in the city and so closed an area, they'd rather be somewhere smaller and quieter where there's a lot less of that. So peace and quiet can be a physical peace and quiet where you feel more at ease and your mental health is better and you don't feel so stressed. And it can also be a religious peace and quiet where you have peace from some of these outside influences that bother you. You're also, of course, going to get a better environment spiritually, physically, mentally, all those things. So now when we talk about moving to a rural area, we have to ask ourselves, how rural do we want to be? You can be incredibly rural. You can be in Idaho in the middle of nowhere where there's not even a paved road to get to your property. Or you could be somewhere where you're just barely outside of town and there's a town nearby. But some of the things that will definitely be on everyone's mind are things like proximity to hospitals. If you were to ever need care, if a member of your family needs care, or if you're concerned about your old age, about possibly needing care, or you just are, having a simcha, like a birth, and you don't want to be alone by yourself. You want to be near a large medical facility. That's one thing to keep in mind when selecting certain parts of the country and certain pieces of land. Another would be proximity to relatives, family, and friends. So a lot of people like to go back to their family for certain holidays. They like to be around for certain events. They want to be there for the weddings and things like that. And that's definitely something that, could play into it. So if you have a lot of relatives, let's say, in a large town like Denver, then you might say, well, I don't want to be 2 or 3 states away. I don't want to be in a position where I couldn't come back to see my relatives every so often. And that also comes into the proximity to an international airport. If you have relatives somewhere like Israel or in another country, you might say, well, I want the ability to fly, in and out if I have to. Of course, Jews bury quickly. They don't have a wake. They don't delay funerals. And if you need, God forbid, to go to a funeral, you don't want to be in a situation where by the time you hear about it, the funeral is already going to be in a couple of hours and there's no way you can make it there anytime soon. You want to be somewhere near an international airport for the purpose of visiting family and, attending events overseas or in other parts of the country as well. Also, maybe even for work. If you have a job that requires you to do some amount of travel, you might want to be near an airport where you could jump on a plane and do that if you need to. Of course, good job prospects leads into you need to have somewhere where you can get a job. Now, that's going to be different from every person depending on their field of expertise and their skills. Some people might have a business that they can already move remotely and they'll just pick it up and plop it over there. Others might need to have a specific type of institution nearby that they could work at. So you need to think about what potentially you could do as a job, whether you would be looking for a new job or trying to maintain your old one, looking for a job in a new field, or acclimating your job to the area you're moving to. You want to think about your job prospects. Utility and infrastructure are also something that comes into every rural area. The question is, do you need things like the internet? Do you want to have your own water arrangements? Do you want to use a well? What about the sewer? Are you going to have a septic tank? Are you going to have a leach field? How are you going to deal with all these problems? And what if you live somewhere like in the north where snow might be an issue? If you have a road which isn't paved that goes for a mile to get from the main road to your property, to your house, that might be a problem. You need a 4-wheel drive vehicle, or you need some sort of system of getting through the snow to make sure you can get in and out. So keep those ideas in mind when you're looking for how rural is too rural of a place for you to go. Now on to the Jewish side of things. We have a unique religion and the way that it connects people together. Judaism in many ways relies on a community for certain events and for certain prayers, davening with a minyan, ideas like that. And there are several different reasons why we need to have some sort of community around. It's not really much of a hermit religion like, some sort of types of Christianity or like Buddhism, where you could just kind of live on a mountain and think really hard with certain kavanas and you could be yotzi. A lot of things that we need to do need to be done in a community, or at least need to have the presence of a skilled professional in order to accomplish them. Certain laws in Judaism are, of course, very complicated, and not everyone knows all of them, definitely. So one thing to think about when establishing a Jewish community would be a rabbi. Having access to a rabbi, having someone who you trust, who you can talk to, whether that person's present there, or whether that's someone that you communicate with on the phone or on the internet. You definitely want to have some sort of a rabbinical leader who can help advise you on certain things. Throughout all of our stages of life, we rely on support for all different sorts of issues. When you have a birth, you have to have a meal. Children are going to need some way to study, some sort of schooling system, and some sort of schooling curriculum. If you have a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, you're going to want to have some sort of celebration. It'll definitely be more meaningful if your children have their friends there, and they do it in a way where, they enjoy themselves with that. Later on, when your kids get older, they might want to go to Israel to learn. So that'll be something else to consider about how you're going to pursue higher education after grade school. And eventually there'll be dating when you're trying to find someone else. That can be harder when you're further away from a large city. And, of course, marriage. You want to have a ceremony. You want to be able to attend with friends and family. It's one of the happier days in your life, so you'll definitely want to have everyone around for that. And, of course, death, when either there's a death in your family that you need to attend, like we mentioned before, or whether it might be the death of someone there. What will be done with them? Will they be buried in that place? Will they be taken to Israel? Will they be taken to a different cemetery? These are all arrangements that are part of our lives. And when planning out your life, when planning on moving to a different place where these systems of support aren't so robust, these are things to think about. When it comes to the issue of kosher food, there's a lot of different solutions, but it's going to be different than walking into the grocery store and buying it, as a lot of people are familiar with it now. Of course, at your local grocer, whatever that may be in that area, there will be some things you can buy that are kosher, and there will be some things that you'll need or want that are not. So we have different ways to get around that and to help with that problem. One is to grow your own food. Obviously, that's the best. It's very healthy. It's very meaningful for a lot of people. But it does take time, and it does take a little bit of effort and a little bit of money, at least initially, to get things started off for growing your own food. You can always freeze things and keep them for long-term storage. Many smaller Jewish communities have often relied on sending someone into town to go buy a certain amount of food or have a special delivery of certain food around certain times a year, and then freezing that food or canning and preserving it to make sure they had it for holidays or other special occasions. And of course, there's always dry goods storage, matzah being the ultimate Jewish survival food. We could definitely keep all of our matzah in storage, but there'll be other things you might want to store, and sending off or ordering online or, bringing something in for whenever someone comes back from a trip might be one of the ways to keep those niche items in that you can't just pick up at any Walmart or Kroger. Of course, another essential part of your homestead will be your synagogue and community, and whether that's that everyone's davening on the Goldstein's porch and the community is the couple people that came over and are having dinner together, or whether that's having an official shul that you designate or making some sort of shul building and having a larger community, that'll depend on your situation and what stage your community is in. But having a general area and a meeting place is important. And community support is also a very important thing. There's a lot of times when people feel, they get out there and they're a little in a kind of culture shock. They're a little cut off from the social areas that they might have been more frequent with before. So having community support to give that sort of mental support as well as physical support, like when someone needs a babysitter or help with something, there's a lot of things that you can't just pick up and dial someone else on. You can't just order Uber, out into the middle of the woods somewhere. So definitely having a community support, a community who's supportive of each other and helping each other out is something that's important. You also want to feel a part of something. It's a very hard mental state to totally be out somewhere where you feel like you're the only Jewish person in town. You could be in a whole city, and if you're the only Jew in Shanghai, you still feel like you're not really connected to anything. When you have some sort of community, when you have even a small one, it can give you this nice feeling that you're together, you're part of something, you have a group of people. And obviously that has to come with a communal attitude, which we'll discuss later about what the community needs to provide and what individuals need to provide. Kids will also want an outlet. You also want to have someone for your kids to play with. You don't want the kids to have to feel like they're bored, and they see other people playing with friends. They see in other areas, they read about people playing with friends. They see shows about people playing with friends, and they don't really have any friends. They feel strange and estranged, distant from other people. So having a community with more children will definitely be beneficial to the kids having a nice environment growing up. Holiday observance is going to be interesting in these areas. In some ways, it'll be awesome. You'll be really out in the thick of it for Sukkot. You'll be having fresh flowers that you can go pick for Shavuot. You'll have all these different things that are enhancing and make you feel freer and nicer. You won't have all this pressure when it comes to Pesach of who's doing what, what's doing who, and where. It'll be, some things will be much simpler. Other things will be a little more difficult. And you'll definitely want to have some community for the holidays. Things like Tchum Shabbos. There'll be certain halachas that will take effect that you may not have thought of. Eruv. If you live in a city that has an Eruv around it all the time, well, those are issues you're going to need to make sure you have for your homestead. An Eruv, a Tchum, knowing how far you can walk, where you can walk to, is important. And for your community, you also want to sort of get those holiday feels, or as they say, the spirit of the holiday. You want to feel like, okay, I hear the singing on Yom Kippur. I hear those same tunes. I know that it's the Yom Kippur time. There's certain holidays that invoke certain feelings, and it's good to have a way to get that in, to feel like you're really observing your holiday. A big Jewish issue particularly is mikveh. Mikveh is a regular necessity for a Jewish family, and having a solution for that is going to be very important. Some rivers will be able to help you, some lakes will be able to help you, and proximity to the ocean might help you for certain things, but you'll definitely want to be able to consult with your Rav regarding these. And eventually, once the community is larger, you want to think about the construction of a mikveh, whether one person will do it in their basement and other people use it, whether you have a shul building or a central mikveh building. Of course, always depends, but you need to think about how much you're going to need to put into mikveh to make sure everyone has what they need for that. It is definitely a significant construction. If you build one, it's a significant expense, and it needs expertise in its construction. You can't really just get the local contractor to slap you up, a basin and call it a mikveh. But you need to have someone who's knowledgeable of these ideas and can come in and do it, and that might be cost prohibitive. So having some sort of alternative option in the meantime, like the ocean or certain rivers or lakes which are sufficient, might be the answer, at least in the beginning. Of course, one of the other main institutions of a Jewish community is the school. So school, we know in the popular culture as meaning lockers, classrooms, teachers, lunch break, recess, the ringing of the bell, getting in, getting out, yellow buses. Well, when you're on a homestead that's much more isolated, school's going to mean a lot more like, well, who can teach and what can they teach? What sort of syllabus are you going to use? What sort of curriculum can you have? I know that Chabad has an online program that they use because they're particularly isolated, and the two parents don't always have time, especially if they're running a community, to teach a whole cadre of kids. So obviously the more people you have in your community, the more of a resource that can be, and someone who can teach and someone who can just supervise learning is something you're going to have to consider. These sort of online programs, whether they're like the Chabad one for Jewish things, or whether they might be a secular online program that homeschoolers use to supplement their general studies in the main population. These are things you'll definitely want to look into. Sometimes these problems actually present opportunities. Everybody say, "Oh, it's so tough. Well, I'll have to be with my kids the whole day, and I have to this." No, there might be a couple parents that really get into that, and they might appreciate the ability to be closer to their kids, and they might develop a much more established relationship with them. Right now, we sort of outsource this whole idea of raising our children, and hopefully this would be a way that someone could connect to that and have a much more meaningful experience. So as far as a rabbi is concerned, that's also something that you need to be aware of. Who can be a Rav? Are you going to have someone on your homestead who's a Rav? Are you going to have someone you can call? Or are you going to ask a lot of questions beforehand, write to someone? Certain, of course, questions aren't going to be able to wait. They're going to need to be consulted right away. Some things, you could wait on and ask questions of later. But it's definitely very important to have a plan of whom you can consult regarding such things as may arise in your life. Because when you're out away, you are going to have more questions. A lot of people's halacha is retained just from the memory of what they remember doing. And because they don't deviate from what was done, they're sort of safe. When you go out to a new place and do new things in a new area with different ingredients and situations, you're going to definitely have more questions. Of course, when selecting a place to live, one of the things you have to consider is who is around you and how much are you going to let them in to your homestead and your community. Work friends and neighbors, people you might meet in the course of daily life, how much do you want them to be involved with your life? Do you want them to be involved a little bit, a lot, not at all? These are all things that need to be done. Of course, when you have kids, they're going to want to have something to do. Are you going to enroll them in certain other activities that might not be centrally Jewish or have other Jewish participants? Would something like Boy Scouts or a soccer team or something be something you consider or not? These are definitely things that, groups like 4-H where kids raise animals and coming together. There's a lot of homeschoolers groups in more rural areas where homeschool kids get together for socialization or something like that. These are definitely things to consider. Remember, what goes in and what goes out are going to affect you in certain ways. It has to be something that you manage and keep a constant watch on. For building your community, let's say, so you've got 2 or 3 families. They're all interested in going out to the same place, and they're serious. We have some people here who are talking about it a little bit, and it's a great thing when people get to a place like this to sort of share this idea. So let's say 5 or 6 or even just 3 families jump on board, and they all say, okay, we're ready to think about moving out somewhere together to start sort of a community where all of our different homesteads. So it might be good for that community to have some sort of charter, something where they sort of lay out on paper their principles of association, or whether they're going to be bound together in a certain way or by certain obligations or not. An example of a bound together community would be something like a kibbutz or a moshav, where let's say the land might be not owned by the individuals, it might be owned by the community as a whole, or there could be a situation where everyone sort of has to work together a certain amount of times. I know I've seen some ideas for communities where everyone would sort of buy their food from one source together in order to negotiate a better price. And these are sort of things you want to think about beforehand. Certain rights that you might want to reserve to the community, certain rights you might reserve to the individuals. These are all ideas that definitely we get out of more of an American sort of style of governance, but things to think about how certain things are going to be done and how much freedom is going to be allocated to someone who lives in the community to do whatever they want, or how much obligation to do certain other things. Of course, you're going to have to consider things like democracy. In a lot of smaller Israeli towns, they have something called a Vaad. They have elected members. They sort of rule on certain things in the same sort of way that you'd have a mayor of a small town, or maybe some sort of planning board or village board. So how much of it is going to be democratic? How much sway would you give to that elected board? Obviously, with only 2 or 3 people, there's not much of an election to happen. But who's sort of going to be the leader, and how are you guys going to get together and decide things with this communal and private property issues? How do you want people to have dogs? Do you not want people to have dogs? whatever sort of questions might arise, and to have some sort of way of dealing with any conflict in that regard. The community will need leadership, and it's not necessarily a rabbi. This could be someone who's just a general leader. There's many different types of leaders in a Jewish community, and when you make your micro community, you're going to need different types of leaders. A good leader, of course, knows when to let others take over too, so you don't want to sort of make everyone do everything all the time, and you don't want to have one person doing everything all the time. You want to sort of spread things out to certain people who are better at certain things, or who can do certain things when others can't. Of course, mutual respect will go a long way with this. The leaders need to respect everyone else, and everyone else needs to respect the leaders. That's the way to keep things civil and happy, and you need to breed sort of an environment where that's the case. There's also the question of the community vis-a-vis the outside world. So if the community is large enough, are we going to have a certain group that represents a sort of liaison who's going to take care of certain things? Are we going to be dealing with the town building department, if there is one, in a certain way, or have a sort of unified approach to that, or is everyone going to be doing their own thing? When we make these friends in new places, are they going to be friends of the community or just friends of individuals? Definitely your community is going to want to make good impressions with whoever it deals with, and that's why a liaison might be something important, some sort of welcome wagon for someone new that comes to visit. If you have a guest that comes out, or someone that's interested in seeing the place, it's good to have some sort of welcome wagon, a person that can sort of say hello, introduce you, and show that person around to whatever they need. And that could be the same way for like an inspector. If a building inspector is coming and looking into someone's property, it might be best to send the person who knows best how to deal with them. So communities also can provide a lot of things to the individual. And obviously the larger the community, the more variety in that which they can provide. But one thing they can provide is a stable place to meet. So like we mentioned before, whether that's the Goldstein's porch or whether that's the newly inaugurated shul, having an area that everyone can get together is part of that, and it's an important part of a community. Communities can help make your environment safer, both physically and emotionally. They can help keep you together emotionally, and they can also look out for each other physically. So if someone goes on vacation, or let's say if someone's out of town, and then you suddenly see that there's someone over at their house, or that something's on fire, a community can definitely help with physical as well. Physical support in times of emergency and special events. So not just emergencies like a fire, but let's say something happens, it's very important, you need to leave. Okay, who's going to take care of your animals? Who can, make sure that your kids are watched while you have to go to the hospital? Who can, do this? You want to go on vacation, it's a wedding, and you don't want to drag along all 12 children. Can someone help with that? Or can someone help give you a ride to the airport so you can get your plane, because maybe only one spouse is going and the other one's going to stay back with the kids? This is also something community can provide. The feeling of togetherness is something that we mentioned before, and the community provides that as well. The vision of the community, or some sort of charter, if the community gets organized in that way, having an idea that we're all here together to lead a religious lifestyle in the country, if that's your vision, we're all here together to make a new community based around this or that, that's something nice to have. It gives you sort of something to strive and work towards, and a feeling of accomplishing something when you do something towards that. Mediation processes are important. In the event that people have some sort of disagreement, it's best not to have to call the cops every time there's some sort of land dispute. It's better if it can be resolved by the leaders of the community, with people being a good judge, being objective, listening to both sides, and trying to come to some sort of mediated agreement. A lot of times when someone's suing someone, a trial won't immediately happen first. They'll just try mediation. Both sides will speak to the judge will hear both sides and see if there is a desire to come to a resolution without a suit. And sometimes that does happen, and they avoid the suit altogether. That's definitely something you want to do in your community. You don't want to have something like a lawsuit. You'd much rather have mediation where both parties understand each other. Like Pirkei Avos says, if both parties leave the judge and they both accept the ruling, then that's the way you want it to happen. You also want a caring community that has a desire to help with these things. You don't want sort of an apathetic community or uncaring community. You want a community that wants to be involved with its people and people that want to be involved with their community. For all these things, you're going to need some sort of community leadership, whether it's all of you three getting together, making a decision, or one person being the head of the community of 12 families, or two people. There needs to be some sort of leadership to help kind of smooth these things out and move them along. Members on the community need to also bring certain things. They need to have a good attitude. They need to have a positive attitude about the community, wanting to make the community and wanting to be there. Obviously, the one teenager that you schlep along to the family vacation and is not at all interested in it doesn't help things get through. So one important thing to realize is that when you move out somewhere like this, it shouldn't be a forced thing. People should come with a good attitude and with a willingness to contribute, where they want to help not just themselves, but they want to help others too. Skills. Every person has their own skill sets and their own things they're good at, and those obviously can be assets to the community, especially if you're really far out. And you may not have a whole lot of people you can call up if you're in the wilderness of Montana and have them come work on your whatever. But if you know someone in the community who has that skill, that's a big help. Assets. If someone's going to come out and they're right away going to buy, let's say 50, 60, 100 acres of land, and they already have farm tools or heavy equipment, they can help out in the community in that way. They can let people use their equipment, they can rent their equipment, and they can also just be, this asset of having this large piece of land, I know that no one else is going to move in next to me, who I don't know who it is. I know that I'm not going to get a corporation setting up some sort of factory over there or something. So I know that I have good neighbors. So that's also an asset. Emotional support, of course. You want people that are going to help out each other, even in just the ways of being a good, normal person, a nice, kind person to you, and all the way up to, advanced emotional support, where if someone's going through a hard time, they can talk through, help you, or be a listening ear. That's definitely something that everyone can bring to a community. And you're going to want a certain amount of unity. You want to feel that part of that group. You want to have some people that want to be unified with other people. If someone's out there to be a hermit, they're not going to have that idea of unity and being together, not in every way, not in eating out of the same bowl and wearing the same shirt, but definitely the idea of being part of something together. And that comes together with dedication to the vision, whatever the community's vision is. You definitely want someone that wants to be part of that too. Individual leadership is true. You want people that can lead themselves. You don't want people that have to be constantly, schlepped around and nudged and whatever. You want people who are responsible adults. And of course, you don't want people to bring massive problems. There's nothing worse than everything going right in your little place, and then someone brings in the beef. This is the plot of many sitcom TV shows, where everything's fine in the perfect little town of whatever, and then suddenly, in rolls so-and-so. But it turns out that he's actually the enemy of someone who's been here for a long time, and now they're going to have to work things out and have a showdown or whatever. So definitely don't bring the beef unless it's cows or meat. Bringing in problems is not going to help at all. So it's been a little longer this time, so I'm going to wrap up here. We'll have another show like this talking about these sort of ideas, trying to flesh them out, and get into anything else we missed. If you've thought of something that I haven't brought up, please let us know in the comments so we can get it in the next show. If you have any questions about what we said or want to elaborate on something, let us know too. Thank you very much for listening. Once again, we are the Jewish Homesteading Project, where our goal is to help you get off the grid while staying on the derech.